We will continue the conversation here as we turn our attention to the workplace. If and when you get back to the workplace, we don't know what it's going to look like, certainly with COVID-19. Now, you throw in the extra element that is right now a hot button topic, and it's an emotional topic, and that is the issue of race. And that is the issue of talking about and embracing the ability to talk about race, which, quite frankly, not many people like to do. Instead, inherently and for years, we've just stuck our head in the sand. But part of the clarion call and everything that is going on in the movement that's occurred in our nation over the last 2 weeks following the murder of George Floyd is the call for dialogue. So how do we do that? How do we break the ice? We know we have to do it. It's one thing to be able to do it in our close circle of friends or maybe within the four walls of our household. Even that's difficult, let alone the workplace. So let's go to our Disc Institute of Pittsburgh Newsline and check in with Cheri Perry, a workplace expert. She joins us here on the Voice of Pittsburgh. Cheri, good evening. Welcome to KDKA.
Hey, good evening, Dan. Thanks for having me on this evening.
Yeah, and a business strategist, leadership expert. You've been working with companies and organizations from coast to coast. You learned under the late, great, legendary speaker, the author of The Motivator, Zig Ziglar, which many people subscribe to. They've read his work. So I guess the question is, how do we do this and where do we start as it pertains to having discussions, particularly in the workplace, which can be a difficult place to talk about anything, let alone something as polarizing sometimes or as a lightning rod topic like race?
You bet. It's an incredibly sensitive topic, like you mentioned, and I think the one word that really helps kind of capture what we should be using when we begin these conversations is using the word careful. You want to be real careful. It's a very, very emotional topic, especially right now as our nation is reeling from all of these things that are happening. Of course, it was a perfect storm, so we've got, people feeling isolated and not doing their normal routine, and then we have some big issue and challenge happening right on top of that. It's tough. And I would say that, when we're talking to the businesses out there across the country, the first thing that we say is you've got to have some open-hearted dialogue, some conversations around a very, very difficult topic that aren't judgmental, but really almost saying, how do you feel? Is there anything I can do to help? And just starting to have those kinds of conversations in the workplace where you can kind of open the door and not be afraid to address the tough topics.
Sometimes easier said than done, though, isn't it, Cheri?
Oh, yeah, it is.
Right.
And like I said, you've got to be careful. There's 3 words that I like to share with the businesses that we work with. When people feel a certain way at work, when they feel safe and secure at work, they tend to be able to have more adult-like conversations and not feel pressure or even, in sometimes singled out. And so the 3 words are, number 1, respect. Whenever you're having a tough topic, the first thing you have to think about on both sides of the equation, and this is difficult. If you watch our social media posts, they are absolutely filled with a lack of respect and a lack of looking at, a position that somebody may have that's contrary to yours. So in the work environment, it's critically important that people feel respected no matter what topic you're discussing. The second word is belonging. People want to belong. They want to feel like they belong somewhere. So if you've got people, and that's why you've got to start asking these questions, is there something in our company culture that makes it feel like you don't belong, and have those kinds of conversations? And the third word is valued. Do they feel that their voice counts, that they're heard, and that they're valuable at the place of work? If you start with some real good, solid ground rules for communicating and use these words, respect, belonging, and value, you usually can talk about just about anything.
Cheri Perry, a workplace expert, our guest on KDKA Radio. How do you make sensitivity training, how do you make any sort of company training that is mandated through HR a captivated impression? Because a lot of times, Cheri, this is my conjecture here, that it can be ineffective. It's not necessarily all that engaging. And a lot of companies, whether that's the sexual harassment training, whether that's any sort of online training, you go through the portal, you go to this seminar or that seminar, it probably doesn't do much to actually address whatever they're trying to combat or prevent, because it's probably not all that engaging. So do companies need to do better in making the captivated impression to their employees?
Absolutely. It's all about engagement. And one of the ways that you can do that is by having stories that are relevant. And I'll give you a good example. I met the comedian Michael Jr., and he is a black comedian. And years ago, he tells a story, and it's actually recently trending on Facebook, about when he was a younger man, he had a really, really emotional and not a positive engagement with a police officer, and how he used giving to get out of the situation. It was very inspiring. But as I listened to that story, I literally felt emotionally connected, because I could feel the frustration and the fear and the pain in his story. So if you want to be having meetings around any of these topics, and you want to have your team engaged, you've got to find some compelling stories that have people thinking, that could have been my brother, that could have been my mom, that could have been my sister, that could have been my son. And if you can connect from a story level, you can have any lesson on any topic and have it go over in a manner where people walk out of that meeting going, man, I never really thought about it like that before, but that makes sense.
Cheri Perry, our guest on KDKA Radio, business strategist, a leadership expert. She works with companies, organizations all around the country. Zig Ziglar disciple, if you will. She studied and learned under the legendary speaker and author. How do you wrap your arms around the dialogue about black-white discrimination and all of the hot button topics that many people, when they go back to work, are certainly going to have to endure? It can be an awkward conversation, an uncomfortable conversation, one that many often choose to just simply not have. Starbucks, back in 2018, many may forget already that after police were called on black customers who were in the store for less than or just around 2 minutes, the manager calls the police. They shut down 8,000 stores across the country 2 years ago in order to conduct racial bias education training after the nationwide protest that subsequently ensued over the treatment of the black customers. I don't think anybody's really done much of a follow-up, Cheri, on how that went, what was conducted, and how effective it was. Can you shed some light?
Well, I do not know how much follow-up that they've done, but I do know that when you have a corporation or a company, or you become aware of some kind of injustice that's happening in your workspace, and in fact, it doesn't even have to be your workspace. I mean, if I'm riding on a bus, or I'm walking at the mall, or doing anything, and somebody wants to spout out a racial epithet or something, that, you know, I have an obligation to make sure that I'm not condoning those kinds of things. So I feel like when Starbucks did that, they took an immediate and swift reaction, at least from what I saw on this end, and I feel like that was a great move. I hope that they made that topic part of their ongoing training, part of their onboarding experience. I know that many companies, if they've had to deal with this issue before, probably have some. I know we do. We've never had a issue in our company with regard to racism or these kinds of issues that we're talking about, but it's in our human resources guide. We talk about it, and we want to make sure that people know that this is just something we don't allow. So companies that take immediate action and make sure that they're training for the possibilities are just basically insulating their work culture. And I certainly hope that, and would think that Starbucks would continue to do that in some form or fashion.
Cheri Perry, workplace expert, legendary speaker, author, Zig Ziglar. She trained under him. She joins us on KDKA radio right now, business strategist. You've worked with companies all over the world. So as we wrap this conversation up, Cheri, what do you think the companies, if you could give them one piece of advice, need to implement moving forward as folks get back into the office? Obviously, COVID is going to be one variable, and everything going on in the world is another. So they're all sort of coming to the head as the country slowly but surely reopens. So it can be a very unique, and I'm being kind here with that word, type of environment. So if you have an HR director that's listening to this program right now, a CEO or a small business owner of a company, what would be your clarion call to them?
I love the question. My clarion call to anyone in leadership, anyone charged with leading a team, any member of a team that wants to have a great work environment, you've got to lead from the heart. And you have to think about the words that come out of our mouths, the actions that we take, all have a ripple effect, and it's got to be good. And so you've got to decide, what will your company culture be? And if you don't address these sensitive topics, because it is not an easy decision, but if you choose not to address them, then you choose to let things kind of simmer under the surface. You've got to bring it out. You've got to talk about it. You have to lead from the heart, and I'll leave you with this. Mr. Ziglar did say that you can have everything in life you want if you help enough other people get what they want. People want to be respected. They want to feel like they belong, and they want to feel valued in your organization. You've got to talk about relevant topics, and you've got to come at it straight and from the heart.
Giver's gain mentality, right?
There you go.
Cheri, I appreciate your perspectives, your expertise, and we'll probably be having a conversation here again. I hope it's under maybe some better circumstances, some circumstances of progress, but nevertheless, I thought it was enriching dialogue, and I appreciate you very much.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening, Dan.
That's Cheri Perry. She is a workplace expert. Again, she has studied under and worked under the late legendary speaker, author, motivator, Zig Ziglar, who many of you likely subscribe to. Maybe his literature is actually mandatory as part of your workplace training. But how do we have that conversation when we go back to work about everything that is going on right now? The elephant in the room, which really nobody knows how to tackle because there's no playbook.